Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the Korea Economic Institute. My name is Kyle Ferrier. I'm a fellow and director of academic affairs here at KEI. Today's program is actually our last program of the year for our academic paper series, which means that we're gearing up for our next iteration next year. The call for papers for next year's series is the due date is actually this Friday the 13th, though hopefully that's not too foreboding for next year. But please, if you're interested, send in your submissions. We have a list of topics on the call for papers, but we're really open to any interesting, new, innovative scholarship as it relates to the Korean Peninsula. So today's program is on Russia and South Korea's economic relations. The last time our speaker was here at KEI, she was here giving a presentation on Russia, North Korea economic relations. And the theme of the paper at the time, that there was a lot of plans to expand ties that are struggling to be fulfilled. And I feel like that sort of will be represented a little bit here today, but there's a lot more actually that's going on in the South Korea-Russia realm as opposed to the North Korea-Russia realm, which we'll leave to our speaker today to shed a little bit more light on. So our speaker is Liudmila Zakharova. She is a senior research fellow at the Center for Korean Studies, the Institute of Far Eastern Studies, the Russia Academy of Sciences. And she's also an associate professor at the Department of World Economy at Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Her research focuses on North Korea economy and regional cooperation projects, and she also did her PhD thesis, which she received, her PhD she received from the Institute of Far Eastern Studies, the Russian Academy of Sciences, so sticking around the same school. And she did her thesis on inter-Korean economic relations and the prospect of trilateral projects with Russia. So really a very good overlap with what we'll be talking about here today. So now I'll turn things over to Liudmila to start the presentation, which will be followed by some questions and answers.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Kyle, for introducing me. Yes, my name is Liudmila Zakharova, and I'm here today to present a paper on economic relations between Russia and the Republic of Korea in the new Northern Policy. But first of all, I would like to thank the Korean Economic Institute of America and its fantastic team for arranging this event for me, for you, and I will be very happy to answer your questions after my presentation. Economic relations between Russia, then the USSR, were established in the late 1980s, and afterwards annual trade increased from less than $1 billion in 1992 to more than $15 billion in 2007. Just excuse me, how can I just press this, yeah? Yeah, so you can see some dynamics on the slide. Also, the beginning of the 21st century was actually marked by a significant increase in the investment from South Korea into Russia. Oh, sorry, excuse me. No, it's not. Can I just go back? Oh, so this, okay, so I'm very sorry. I'll master it by the end of the presentation, probably. Major Korean companies such as Samsung, Hyundai, and Lotte tried to increase their share in the Russian market and made investment in the Russian Federation. Furthermore, in 2008, the leaders of the two countries declared a goal of elevating the level of bilateral relationship to strategic partnership, and this obviously meant further expansion of economic relationship between the two countries. Also, in the 2010s, Russian Federation started to pay more attention to its Far Eastern regions and their economic development. Russia's plans for the development of its Pacific territories require closer cooperation with neighboring states, and they correlate with South Korea's desire to closely integrate with the Eurasian countries. And these long-term interests, coinciding interests, create a long-term prerequisite for deeper and more diversified economic cooperation between our countries in the future. The new Northern Policy was declared by South Korean President Moon Jae-in in Vladivostok during this third Eastern Economic Forum in September 2017. And the initiative is designed to boost economic cooperation between South Korea and its northern neighbors, including Russia. This initiative is not first of its kind. And in the late 1980s, the then South Korean President Roh Tae-woo, he initiated the original Northern Policy, the aim of this policy was to improve relations with North Korea, and it actually resulted in the beginning of economic cooperation between South and North Korea, and it also resulted in the establishment of diplomatic relations between the USSR and the Republic of Korea and China and the Republic of Korea. From this perspective, we can say that the current president of South Korea has set a really ambitious goal of improving inter-Korean relations and also expanding relationship with its northern neighbors, including Russia. President Moon himself put it in the following way: cooperation with Russia is the prerequisite of South Korea's new Northern Policy, he said. And also, I would like to emphasize that this new Northern Policy, together with the new Southern Policy, is advertised as a tool to realize the new economic map for the Korean Peninsula, which you might have heard about. And the aim is to integrate South Korean economy closely with the economies of the other Eurasian states. President Moon encouraged Russia to push ahead with cooperation projects in 9 key sectors, and it is called the 9-bridge strategy. It was announced together with the new Northern Policy in September 2017. And the strategy includes, you can see it, yeah? It's mainly 9 key areas which cover cooperation in different spheres, and some of them focused on Far East area. I can say that any of these areas is really new for bilateral cooperation, but they just more vividly show the South Korean interest in cooperating with the Russian Far East. Not sure if I need to read it. You can see it yourself. If you need, just let me know, please. If you need more explanation on any of these areas which I won't cover, which I don't cover in my presentation, just ask my question, please. But to implement this strategy and the new Northern Policy, the president created a special committee. It's called Presidential Committee on Northern Economic Cooperation, which consists of 5 official members and also more than 20 members of civilian sector. The first head of this committee was Son Yeon-gil. He is famous for his role in Russia-South Korea relations, and he was even awarded Russia's Order of Friendship for it. He was quite active in his position and strongly advocated that through pursuing the new Northern Policy, Korea would be able to ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula by expanding economic ties with such countries as Russia and China. The first meeting of the committee was held in December 2017, and the first aim was to work out a blueprint for implementing different projects, mutually beneficial economic projects with Russia, and develop necessary practical measures for it. Russia obviously welcomes the northern-oriented diplomacy of South Korea because it needs peace at the border, and the idea of better relations between South and North Korea obviously serve this aim. And also Russia is interested in more international cooperation for its Pacific territories. And President Putin even said after the summit with President Moon in September 2017 that Russia expects more participation of South Korea in large-scale infrastructure projects, such as modernization of ports, and also building shipyards in the Far East, as well as joint development of the North Pole route. Russian experts from the Far Eastern Federal University argue that at the current stage, if we look at this map of all the 9 bridges, at the current stage, gas and transportation projects have the most potential among the 9 bridges. In particular, Seoul can diversify its gas import channels by purchasing more LNG from Russia. The volume of gas supply can be increased considerably, especially if the current plans of building an LNG plant in Vladivostok are implemented. In terms of transportation, South Korean participation in North Korea logistics project called Hasan Rajin was viewed as a natural first step on the way to connect Trans-Siberian and Trans-Korean railroads. Russia also welcomes participation of the Republic of Korea in the modernization of Far Eastern ports. However, you can see on this slide that Korea was first interested in modernization of such ports as Zarubina in Primorye province in the Far East, the south of it. But according to local experts, there might be a conflict of interest with Chinese companies in developing this particular port, and therefore the locals say that there is more potential for South Korean companies in developing another port of Slavyanka, which is closer to Vladivostok. But right now, this project is just being at the stage of development. Also, Russia sees South Korean companies as promising partners in providing technological assistance to create a modern and big shipyards in Primorye province. There's a long history of this project implementation, and at the first stage in 2009, Russia's United Shipbuilding Corporation and Korean company Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering established a joint venture on the base of Zvezda shipyard. It's a shipyard in Primorye province, not far from Vladivostok. However, unfortunately, that project was not implemented as the Korean company withdrew from the project. Later on, Rosneft, famous Russian oil company, led a consortium, established Zvezda on the base of the same shipyard. It established Zvezda shipbuilding complex to produce heavy tonnage ships, elements of offshore platforms, ice-class vessels, and other special vessels and marine equipment locally. To achieve such an ambitious goal for the current stage of Russia's shipbuilding, it's in the Far East, it's quite an ambitious goal, and to achieve it, Russia needs foreign technology and management expertise. Therefore, in September 2019, Zvezda Shipyard and another Korean company, Samsung Heavy Industries, announced the establishment of a new joint venture to manage projects for the construction of shuttle tankers. And according to this agreement, Samsung Heavy Industries is supposed to provide technical support as well as engineering assistance for the construction of shuttle tankers at the Zvezda shipbuilding complex. So once again, Russia is trying to rely on South Korean assistance in developing a shipbuilding cluster in the Far East. However, like the major form of Russia-Korea cooperation is trade, actual trade. Unfortunately, it lacks diversity. What I mean is that Russia mostly sends its mineral resources to South Korea and returns industrial products back. This formula makes bilateral exchanges particularly vulnerable in the face of economic downturns. The decrease of the two countries' external trade in 2015-2016 inevitably caused a decline in bilateral trade. However, since 2017, and it coincides with President Moon coming to power, Russia's exports and imports with the Republic of Korea have continued growing year on year. You can see it from the table on the slide. As a result, last year South Korea took third place after China and Turkey among Russia's trading partners in Asia and other in figures, the role of Korea for Russia is more than 3% of total foreign trade. At the same time, Russia occupies only 2% of the Republic of Korea's total trade. In September 2017, the leaders of the two countries set a goal of increasing bilateral trade to $30 billion by next year, actually. This level looks quite achievable if we take the continued growth this year into consideration. In the first 6 months of this year, the volume of bilateral trade increased by 20%. The structure of trade, however, remains traditional, and more than 80% of the most demanded Russian goods in South Korea are still mineral products. Also about 8% is fish and seafood. In return, South Korea sends Russia mainly machinery, equipment, and vehicles. They account for more than 60% of Russian imports from Korea last year, and also chemical products and metals and metal products. At the same time, Russia enjoys a solid surplus in goods trade with South Korea. Last year, the surplus exceeded $10 billion. The situation is a bit different in bilateral trade in services. You can see the recent statistics on the slide. Last year, Russia's services exports to the Republic of Korea were mostly transportation, travel, and other business services, while Russia mostly imported travel and transportation services, charges for the use of intellectual property, and maintenance and repair services from Korea. Another important and interesting issue is the prospects of concluding an FTA between the two countries. Under President Moon, South Korea started to push for concluding a free trade agreement between South Korea and the Eurasian Economic Union as part of its efforts to expand cooperation with Russia. The issue has been raised at bilateral summits, but the progress in trade liberalization has been slow so far. The Russian side expresses concerns that the FTA format may allow South Korea to increase its exports to the Eurasian Economic Union countries on a much larger scale that can be done in the opposite direction. The industries in which production is localized are especially sensitive, such as automobile manufacturing, for example. Unlike South Korea, which has a full-fledged strategy for concluding FTAs with different countries around the world, Russia doesn't have such a strategy yet. Moreover, after the conclusion of an FTA with Vietnam several years ago, from which a large-scale influx of investment was expected, the Russian side seems to be a bit disappointed with the actual results. And in this context, Moscow is unlikely to intensify efforts for trade liberalization until it sees significant investment from the Korean side or receives reliable guarantees that this investment will follow. But Seoul has a different position on this issue, and South Korean companies are said to be very interested in broader cooperation with Russia and investing more in Russia. But they have concerns about the local investment climate, and as South Korean representatives try to persuade Russian skeptics, the existence of an FTA agreement would allow Korean entrepreneurs to invest more safely in the Russian Far East and other countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. Therefore, from the perspective of South Korea, it's important to first conclude an FTA and then wait for more investment. But this argument doesn't seem to be convincing enough for the Russian government, and as a result, Russia and Korea agreed to start negotiations on an FTA only in the service and investment sectors last year, and the negotiations have been officially underway since June this year. However, Seoul did not give up on the idea of discussing an FTA in goods with Russia, and in the current economic layout in the region, it has to negotiate it with all the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union, which includes Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. Another area of cooperation is investment. I have already touched upon it a bit, but I will speak more. Now you can see the latest statistics on the website, but speaking about the history a bit, the biggest investment was made in the 2006-2009, as you can see from the diagram, and large-scale investment was mostly attributed to the big Korean companies' efforts to grow their share in the Russian market, and the biggest investment were attracted to Russia's automobile industry. I can name Hyundai motor plant in St. Petersburg, for example. Also, electronic industry. We have some plants of Samsung Electronics and LG plant not far from Moscow. Also, food processing industry. It's Lotte confectionery factory and the Dosherak factory in the central region of Russia. And also service sectors, where Lotte Group invested a lot in building of a hotel and a business center in Moscow and then in other regions. But you can see that right now the investment cooperation can be said that it's now marked by stagnation. It is still being pursued, but in less volumes, and especially in the 2016-2017, the annual flow fell below $100 million. According to the Bank of Russia, at the beginning of this year, total inward direct investment was from the Republic of Korea to Russia was less than South Korea's total FDI outward stock and less than 1% of Russia's total FDI inward stock. So the figures are not big, but the good thing is that most of this investment is not in the oil-connected sectors, but it's mostly invested in manufacturing, as I have already named the examples you can see, and also part is invested in trade, in financial services, and some in agriculture. To boost bilateral investment, especially Korean investment into Russia, the two countries have tried to set up a joint financial platform. Back in November 2013, when Russian president was visiting Seoul, the two countries signed a memorandum of understanding even it was a memorandum of cooperation between two banks, the Korea's Exim Bank and Russia's Vneshekonombank, which planned to establish a $1 billion investment platform to provide joint financial support for projects implemented in Russia. However, this platform has never been activated. And among the main reasons for this, we can see such reasons as sanctions imposed on Russia by the West, difficulties in finding profitable projects during the period of economic stagnation in Russia. The ruble devaluation in 2014 here, and also Korean representatives name hypersensitivity, as they call it, of South Korean businesses to country-related risks, especially in the case of dealing with the Russian Far East. So that platform didn't work out, unfortunately, and in 2017, President Moon offered to create a new platform. It was already $2 billion joint investment platform for supporting projects in the Russian Far East. Again, memorandum of cooperation was signed, but between Far East Development Fund in Russia and again the Exim Bank of Korea. And the two institutions consider different forms of joint assistance for projects with participation by Korean investors. However, the only project that is known as being funded by Exim in the Far East is a loan to the Lotte Group, Lotte, to acquire agricultural assets in Primorye province. That is the only project by now. Another project which could really improve the situation with Korean investment in the Far East was the project to build a fish processing complex in Primorye, and there was a Korean company called Korea Trading and Industries that expressed willingness to invest $130 million in building such a complex in Vladivostok. However, it didn't manage to receive the local permits for building it, and is now considering another place for this complex. Another example can be an industrial complex in Primorye, which Korea's Land and Housing Corporation, or LH Corporation, is now working on, and it implies building of an industrial complex for about 30 Korean companies to work in Primorye, and with the government support. Obviously, Land and Housing Corporation is a state body in Korea. Another sphere is the additional investment from the existing investors. A good example here is a special investment agreement by Hyundai Motor in Russia, signed last December with the Russian authorities, which would increase Hyundai's investment in Russia's automobile industry for building R&D center and modernizing production in St. Petersburg plant. And the figure is about $270 million during the next 9 or 10 years. South Korea expected rapid growth of investment into Russia due to all these efforts. They even created a Korean investors support center in Vladivostok for on-site assistance to Korean investments in Far Eastern regions. But it turned out that there are certain obstacles in the way. And according to South Korean officials, what I heard, among the biggest obstacles for broader cooperation are still a bit volatile currency exchange rate, language barrier. It has always been a case in our cooperation. Also, lack of general information about Russia and Western sanctions on Russia, which haven't been lifted. Russian experts add other difficulties to this list. They include conflicts of interest between some projects, such as possible competition between North Korea and Port of Jae-in, if some projects were implemented and sanctions lifted. So it's competition between North Korean ports and ports in Primorye province, because they are basically very close and they can compete for freight. Also, another area is possible competition of shipbuilding industries in Russia and South Korea, because if Russia creates a really internationally a large scale and capable of producing modern shipyard, it can really compete with Korean companies, at least for Russian orders. As right now, some of big Russian orders are being implemented by South Korean companies such as Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, for example, for the project of Yamal LNG project. And one more obstacle is the history of failed deals in the past. For example, the withdrawal of Daewoo from the shipbuilding project in Primorye, and also the sale of Hyundai factory built near Vladivostok, as it didn't work, unfortunately, and they had to sell it. Also, one of the cases that South Koreans remember and sometimes say that we wouldn't want this to repeat. Another aspect of bilateral Russia-South Korea cooperation is the prospect of trilateral cooperation. It's always on the agenda. I don't think that I have seen any Russia-South Korean summit which doesn't mention the prospects of and potential of trilateral cooperation. Last year, when during the official visit of President Moon into Russia, the two presidents agreed to intensify research. Well, research is probably the only thing that is possible in the current stage of international sanctions against North Korea. And the research should be in three main areas: is railways, gas, and electric power. Inter-Korean rapprochement, generally inter-Korean rapprochement last year laid a foundation for further progress in the implementation of multilateral projects with the participation of Russia. And one of the first items on the agenda of the Special Presidential Committee on Northern Economic Cooperation was to explore opportunities of South Korea to join that Hassan Rajin logistics project implemented by Russia and North Korea if sanctions were to be eased. I mean, the project itself is excluded. It's an exemption from the sanctions of the UN Security Council. So it's fully legal to participate in it, but they probably were waiting for their unilateral sanctions, South Korean unilateral sanctions against North Korea, which prevent Seoul from taking part in it. Back in the past, in 2013-2015, a consortium actually of South Korean companies, including POSCO, Korail, and Hyundai Merchant Marine, with the support of the Republic of Korea's government, considered the possibility of joining this Russian-North Korean logistics project. They even executed 3 trial shipments of Russian coal through Rajin port to South Korea. The results were considered to be successful, and there were some estimates in South Korea that possible investment of South Korea into the project could be around $150, even $200 million. But in the end, unfortunately, in early 2016, the Korean government announced the suspension of all negotiations on possible participation in multilateral projects with North Korea due to the nuclear test by Pyongyang. President Moon, in his new economic map of the Korean Peninsula, prioritized transportation cooperation with North Korea and even allocated a big budget of like $263 million in this year's South Korean government budget to the connection and modernization of inter-Korean railways and roads. Pyongyang also expressed interest in this project as it agreed to conduct a joint on-site study of North Korean railways and highways, and they even held a groundbreaking ceremony last December in Kherson City. But despite such positive developments, this year brought a new deadlock in negotiations between North Korea and America, as well as an end to inter-Korean exchanges. I can't say that Russian side was really very much optimistic about the prospects of South Korea joining Hassan Rajin logistics project, but it still had some hopes and was actively responding to South Korea's side desire to consider its return to the project, but it would definitely require lifting of some of South Korea's unilateral sanctions against North Korea and some easing of the UN Security Council sanctions against North Korea, for example, for additional investment, which might have been needed. Russian companies are also, on the other hand, Russian companies are also very much interested in cooperation in electric power sphere and within the framework of trilateral cooperation. The project would require constructing new power plants in the Russian Far East and could further contribute to the development of Russia's Pacific territories. However, the unsolved nuclear issue, as well as international economic sanctions against North Korea, continue to stall all multilateral initiatives, unfortunately. Probably summing up my presentation, I would like to say that since President Moon prioritized relations with Russia, the two countries have made real efforts to develop cooperation. High-level contacts have intensified considerably, and working-level meetings have become more goal-oriented and diversified. However, after inter-Korean exchanges stopped this year, I think that the Russia-oriented diplomacy of South Korea has also started to show signs of decline. 2 years after the establishment of the Special Presidential Committee tasked with developing economic relations between the two countries and finding new projects, they didn't bring really a huge change to the overall trend of the two countries' economic cooperation development. So bilateral trade continued its revival, but without almost no change to its structure. new big investment into the Russian forest from South Korea hasn't come yet. The good question is why it is happening. I have touched upon some of the reasons. So it's international sanctions against Russia, which South Korean companies are afraid of, actually. Also it's the North Korean nuclear issue, which stalls some of the initiatives. But also there's some difficulty in finding mutually beneficial projects that can be implemented quickly and without government's support. In September 2017, President Moon compared the newly launched Presidential Committee on Northern Economic Cooperation with Russia's Far East Development Ministry in its role in establishing a state system for cooperation and developing the Far East. However, the committee actually functions mostly as an advisory organ, has very few permanent staff, and doesn't have the power to enforce its decisions. Moreover, after its first head, Son Yong-gil, stepped down in July last year, the activity of this special body has also subsided. But at the same time, Moscow's primary goal in developing the Far Eastern regions is to provide a comfortable social and economic environment that retains and attracts the Russian population there. And this goal still creates opportunities for broader economic cooperation with the Republic of Korea. And from my perspective, and actually in Russian and South Korean scholars speak about it a lot, joint projects in such spheres as agriculture, tourism, service sectors, medicine and healthcare could create new jobs for Russians and improve the local living standard, contributing to expansion of cooperation between South Korea and the Far East region. South Korea is already the most important economic partner for the Far Eastern region, but right now it's mostly in trade, and the trade in mineral resources, actually. So most of it comes from the Sakhalin gas project, and most of Korea's export to Russia goes to the central part, where most of population actually lives. But if we speak particularly about Russian Far East and South Korea, I can say that there have been some interesting developments on such levels as tourism. Back in 2014, the two countries signed an agreement on on visa-free entry program, and after it, the number of tourists increased considerably. If 2 years ago there were less than 200,000 South Korean tourists to Russia, then last year we saw already 350,000 South Korean tourists to Russia, and more than 70% of them went to Far Eastern regions, particularly Vladivostok. Vladivostok is a very popular destination for weekend tourists from South Korea. They say that 2 hours, the flight is 2 hours, and you are in Europe. So Vladivostok is seen as the closest and most cost-efficient opportunity to see how Europeans live, to say so. And myself, when I went to Primoria this year in August, I saw so many South Koreans there. They come in groups, individually. However, it's very interesting. And this increased cooperation obviously requires the development of local infrastructure. And it can be seen that the need for more accommodation, more services in different spheres, it may really increase their investment on the level of maybe medium-sized businesses from South Korea and even small-sized businesses. And on the other hand, Russian tourism to South Korea is also growing. And one of the interesting reasons is that medical tourism is very popular among the population in the Far East. So Russians go to South Korea for medical checkups and treatment. And this opens new interesting opportunities for developing healthcare cooperation in the Russian Far East, as Russia is currently planning to develop an international medical cluster in Vladivostok, and South Korean companies, big South Korean hospitals, are really showing their interest in growing cooperation in this area too. So I think that speaking about people-led cooperation and the prospects of Russia-South Korea relations, next year we will celebrate the 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations, and I think we are coming to this, Russia and Korea are coming to this date well equipped, especially at least in the economic sphere. I mean, we have diversified cooperation in maybe not as diversified as we would like, but naturally it is increasing in trade. It's continuing in investment, and it has really new points of growth and new growth engines on the level of people-to-people exchanges right now. So I would like to finish my presentation by saying this, and you're welcome to ask me any questions. Will do my best to answer them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for that very comprehensive and great presentation. I might add, very aptly delivered, considering that you arrived last night from Moscow, much better than I would have been able to do. I wanted to contextualize your talk a little bit, and you had mentioned that the 9 bridges aren't necessarily all that new. And you talked about Nord-EU, Nordpolitik, and how there's some sort of policy continuation in terms of South Koreans, how they look northward towards Russia. How, in your estimation, is the new northern policy same or different from what has come before, and how the Moon administration is approaching the Russia issue and the Russian Far East?
Thank you very much for this very good question. Some experts say that there is nothing new in the new northern policy, but I would say that it's just, first of all, it emphasizes more interest of South Korea to the Far East. It, as I said, it conceptualizes actually this interest. But it also includes not just Russia, but the Central Asian countries as well. When the original northern policy was proclaimed in the 1980s, those countries didn't even exist. So one of the directions of the new northern policy is their cooperation with Central Asian states, such as Uzbekistan, for example. It's being developed quite quickly now. But I think the main aim actually was to improve inter-Korean cooperation, actually. And usually this component from the very beginning of northern policies is the most important, yes, to use cooperation with Russia. Not just use, but I mean part of it was to develop a bilateral track, but another part was to develop trilateral cooperation. That's what this new economic map for the Korean Peninsula serves for. If you look at it, you can obviously see that it involves North Korea without any alternative. But without North Korea's participation, unfortunately, some of these projects, they cannot be realized, such as this connection of Trans-Siberian and Trans-Korean railroads. Also, the gas project, I mentioned just LNG supplies, but another part of this is to construct a pipeline going from the Russian Far East through North Korea to Russian Korea, or to Russian Korea, sounds interesting, to South Korea. And another idea was to create an industrial complex. I said about this, this bridge has a bit evolved because of this sanctions on North Korea, which have not been eased, unfortunately. But initially, there was an idea to build an industrial complex in the Russian Far East where North Korean workers would actually work. So yes, as labor, use them as labor force. But unfortunately, as we know, that the deadline for North Korea's repatriation is looming. So it's the 22nd of December. There won't be any North Korean workers in Russia anymore, unfortunately. So this industrial complex project is now being developed on just bilateral level between South Korea and Russia. And maybe I could expect that they might actually attract some labor force from the Central Asia, maybe, because we don't have that much people in the forest. So if it grows in scale, then might be some migrant workers be invited from other areas as well.
And just to further add on to the context, you had talked a lot about North Korea being an obstacle to South Korea-Russia cooperation, and you had also mentioned earlier that Western sanctions, U.S.-led sanctions on Russia are also an obstacle. So in terms of maybe not necessarily to compare the two, but to compare the two, how much of an obstacle does North Korea present? How much of an obstacle does the U.S. present in terms of South Korea-Russia engagement?
I wouldn't say that North Korea is an obstacle. The unresolved nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula is an obstacle. So I would say that just this unresolved issue does not let the potential of trilateral cooperation to be realized. So we speak, as my PhD thesis many years ago was on prospects of trilateral cooperation, I can say that there have been projects that are beneficial for all the three countries, but they haven't been realized because of these political issues and some economic issues, but they could be solved if the political situation on the peninsula was better. So speaking about North Korea, it's mostly about unrealized potential. So it's mostly the potential that lies there but cannot be fully used because of the sanctions and the tensions on the peninsula. And speaking about American sanctions, from what I hear is that although South Korea didn't officially declare any sanctions, like Japan, for example, or European countries, there are no official sanctions against Russia from South Korea. But as Korea depends a lot on American financial system, I see that Korean banks and big companies, they are afraid of secondary sanctions from America. So that's probably the main way how the American sanctions really influence the cooperation.
And my last question before I turn it over to the audience, you had listed the 9 different areas, the 9 bridges, and you gave us the opportunity to ask a question about any one of those. And I thought it'd be interesting to ask about the North Pole route, because this is something that we've been talking about in the U.S. and how do we figure out the future of that region. And South Korea, Russia cooperation really is an interesting one in that I know the U.S. and Russia are also sort of trying to figure out how to approach the region, and it's a bit more competitive, at least how it's been framed in my perspective, than a cooperative one. And South Korea and Russia could potentially provide some bridge between that or complicate things a little bit more. But I'm just interested to know a little bit more on the new northern route, sea route in the Arctic.
I would say that it's one of the bridges that hasn't been really covered well, to be honest. But analytically, I can see that South Korea is very much interested in building vessels for exploiting the route. So they already built ice-class vessels for Russian Yamal LNG project. And I can see that it's one of them. But I think that Seoul says it's one of the opportunities to grant more orders for South Korea's shipbuilding industry, which is now struggling, as you might know. And this is the first thing. And the second one is as a shorter transportation route between Asia and Europe. It's also very interesting for Korea to transport goods through it, especially if some climate changes are and ice melts. But I know there are different considerations. But to be honest, I haven't heard a lot about some projects except for this building ships agreements, this one.
Thank you for the answer. We'll turn things over now to the audience. We have roving mic. We'll take them in groups. I think we'll just start at these first 3 in order, and then we'll give you the opportunity to answer them once they've all been asked. So we'll start with Bill and work our way down. Rachel, thanks.
Yeah, you mentioned the Rajon, I call it Najin, but the Rajon project. And I'm curious as to what's going on there. As you said, the UN sanctions, Russia asked that it not be included, and it was excluded from the normal sanctions with North Korea. So as I understand it, Russia is free to, and they helped build the refurbish the railroad and the docks there. And for a few years there, maybe 1 year, Russia was sending coal, bituminous coal. North Korea's is anthracite, so this is bituminous coal to Najin by train, unloading it or loading it onto ships. And the ships would go largely to China, a few to South Korea, as you mentioned, I think just 2 or 3. But as I understood it, the main route was going to be from Russia to Najin to China or to other, not really South Korea. But I haven't heard much, and it's fine with the UN sanctions, there's no problem with that, but I haven't seen much development of that even despite, so it makes me wonder, is it really the sanctions that's the problem, or is it North Korea that's the problem there? But, or maybe it's not, maybe the program is developing strongly. I just don't think it's developing very strongly.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Mike Billington. I'm with Executive Intelligence Review. 2 questions, if I may. I wonder what you think the impact of Mr. Glaziev's recent appointment for responsibility on the Far East, what impact that has both within Russia and also in the other nations of around the Far East. And secondly, you may not know, because it hasn't been covered in the press, but President Trump very, very strongly reiterated his commitment to having a friendly relationship with Russia during the NATO meeting on the sidelines, which went unreported in the U.S. with the anti-Russia and anti-China hysteria which governs the Congress and the press here. But it was Russia and China's collaboration with Trump that really got the thing moving in North Korea. So where do you see now the ability to overcome the current stall by this kind of cooperation between the U.S., Russia, and China?
Thank you. I'm Nathaniel Conrad with the U.S. Asia Institute. And first of all, thank you for your remarks. I very much enjoyed them. I thought they also were very comprehensive. I wanted to ask a little more about Russia-South Korea trade. It seems to me that there are at least 2 newer problems facing South Korea presently. One being potential scarcity of rare earth minerals, just because we've heard that the majority of them are in China, and if China decides it doesn't want to continue to trade those with other countries, there might be a shortage, and so countries like Samsung might not have as much access. Is there any potential? So my first question is there any potential for Russia to make up for that potential shortfall in these rare earths? And my second question is somewhat related to that as well. So the liquefied natural gas plans that have been put in place between South Korea and Russia, as I understand, are not unique. There also are similar plans between Russia and China. And so my question is, do you think that South Korea has any guarantees in place with Russia that it will continue to receive LNG from Russia in the event that there is more demand from China or less supply from Russia? So will Russia prioritize one of the 2 of those countries if there is any increase in demand or shortage? Just because also South Korea is a massive importer of LNG. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for questions. Very interesting. Some of them really interesting and probably require more research from me, but I will try to reply as best as I can. So thank you very much, Bill, for asking me about Rajin Hassan project. Yes, it's not currently, it's not in the best shape, unfortunately, because China stopped to buy coal going through Rajin some time ago. So it's mainly Chinese factor, actually, It's not about sanctions, it's about Chinese. It's a very good question, but for a couple, I think, since last year, there have been very rare transportations of coal going through it. I think the situation goes back to the time when China-North Korea relations were not good at all. When all the sanctions, the UN Security Council sanctions were passed, and there has been no real change since that. I can't say that I know a lot in depth about this, but I heard that the problem is with the Chinese companies who are not buying coal via Rajin anymore. The Russia-Korea joint venture Rosontrantrans, which is the operator of this project, they're doing their best to find clients for using Rajin, but unfortunately it's still, I also haven't heard about any new shipments, unfortunately. That's why the inter-Korean rapprochement last year was such an ideal situation for Russia, as we really expected. I can't say that there was some too much optimism about it, but it would be really a very good situation for this project, as it needs to be. It is functioning. Yeah, people are working there. So the railroad is used, but not as much as it could be, because the volume that can be handled at Rajin port is about 5 million tons per year, and during its best period it was more than 2 millions, but it was 2017 exactly, I think. Yeah, like this.
Commercially, does it seem to make? Is it viable? Is it the price?
I heard that it was commercially viable. Another question is what the Russian side needs to somehow return their investment. So they hoped for about like 4 or 5 million tons of freight to be handled annually to break even at the first stage. So now the question of investment return is also important, and the operating. I suppose that operating expenses are also quite high there, because there are like several dozens of Russian workers stationed there. Yes, also they hire Rosontrantrans hires North Korean workers, so it's also it's money that is being invested anyhow. So can't say more, unfortunately, because I don't really know. Speaking about global questions, really, I don't think that the appointment of any new official of Mr. Glaziev will be crucial for the development of the Far East. It's already been under the supervision of Yuri Trutnev, who is the vice premier, and it's already been managed by the Ministry of Far East Development. Sorry, yeah. So I don't see that there will be any real change after Mr. Glaziev was appointed. So not sure that. Did you mean anything specific? How you see this change? Because I'm not sure that I maybe understood your question.
Playing a very important role before as an important personal advisor. It just makes you think he must have been appointed for a reason.
Good question. Not sure that I know the answer. It's about the strategy exists. Okay, Russia has a strategy. I mean, the central government has a strategy for developing the Far East regions. People who live there themselves also have their own ideas on how their regions should be developed. So it's the question of if he would influence. But he is the central government official, so it's again about Russia's strategy of developing the Far East. Not sure that it can be seriously changed. There are already so many programs, strategies, and incentives being one of the last incentives was a very low mortgage rate for young families living in the Far East that President Putin announced at the latest Eastern Economic Forum. So, not sure that he will be. And also the good question. Am I talking too much? Probably. A good question is how he will communicate and share this responsibility with Yuri Trutnev, who is already responsible at the vice premier level. He's responsible for the Far East development. So this is a good question, yes. So we'll see how it develops in their relationship as well. And the second question was about, I'm happy to hear that America wants to cooperate with Russia and China. It's really good. But on the level of practical measures, it hasn't been really reflected yet, as far as I see. Yes, and especially with China. But from what I can see in Russia-South Korea relations, South Korea often looks at Washington, what Washington says. So if there are any practical measures in improving relations between America and Russia, I think it should have a positive impact on possible cooperation between Russia and South Korea. As we see, for example, investment, yes. We have sanctions, American sanctions. I think 3 years ago, I also was speaking about American sanctions against Russia. So it's probably the same. The situation hasn't changed a lot. So everybody's actually used to it. I think we're already living in the world where the sanctions are taken as they're forever. So they're just adjusting their plans and can't really expect something really better in the short term, because I think there's also a question of American elections coming soon, maybe impeachment. And no, I don't know. I don't really predict any really better relations between the. Okay, I'm moving to the next question. Not sure if I replied, but thank you. Wow, now too. Okay. It feels competition. Definitely feels competition from that one and starts to work. So don't put it far away. Rare earths. Can Russia supply South Korea with rare earths? Very good question. Exactly after the dispute between Japan and South Korea started, there were some rumors that South Korea was looking to Russia for maybe substituting the materials that they were importing from Japan, but then it turned out that we don't really produce them in big quantities. So this question definitely needs more research. As I'm not sure that Russia has the potential to satisfy the needs of South Korean economy in rare earths. So I know that they are used in electronics, and as South Korea has a very developed electronics, they must be. And yes, it's mainly from China. China is the biggest player on this market right now. But from what I feel is that South Korea has recently become more interested in considering possible cooperation with Russia in such areas as new materials or new, or supply of some materials. Yes, that's it. So maybe this can be covered in this section of our cooperation. We'll see, but nothing decided yet. And gas supplies. Wow, China is the biggest, really. Client for Russia in Asia, of course, in terms of gas supply. And although Russia's gas supply volume has been growing to South Korea, it's mostly from the Sakhalin project. So if we speak about prospect prioritizing, I don't think that there might be an issue in the near future of Russia having to choose between supplying gas either to China or Korea. right now it seems to me that this issue is not on the agenda, and if it is, very good question, prioritizing. Why should it happen? Do you have an idea?
Well, no, it's just Korea is becoming more and more dependent on coal and shipping LNG through the Strait of Malacca. And I was wondering, since Russia has now been building these new pipelines, if it would be able to guarantee it better.
Not pipelines actually, because if we want to build a pipeline, it should go through North Korea. It's unfortunately not an option right now. What I heard is that South Korea has already signed an agreement to increase the supply from America, from the US. So that's actually a question that is also taken into consideration by Russia, that we're actually competitors with the US in terms of gas supplies to Korea. So from what I heard, that Korea wanted to increase the supply from Russia, and it has already increased it. And right now the question is that they need to build a new LNG plant, yes, to increase the volume of produced LNG in Russia. And one of the projects is to build it near Vladivostok, but it's still a project. Nothing has been signed. I know that the Japanese companies were interested, Korean companies, so it's still on the discussion stage right now. Yeah.
My colleague, sorry, just on some state comments. Why is Novatech not taking Korean money, but they have Chinese money and the Japanese are getting into Novatech?
Maybe South Korean companies are not, offering them properly. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I have heard about big interest of South Korean companies in buying the Novatech stakes. So we'll see how it goes. But with Chinese side, they definitely have good cooperation. Yes, I know. If we look back in the history of South Korean participation in Russia's gas projects, we can see that it usually takes a long time for South Korea to consider participating in any of such projects. And by the time they decide that they want to buy something, it's already sold out. But it's from the history. Then now maybe something changes, but that's how it happened in the past.
Ready for the next round of questions? I guess we'll work our way down again, and we'll start in front. Just wait for Mike, please.
Yes. Hello, my name's David Gossick. I'm currently a consultant. My question is, I'd like to hear your thoughts about what the closer economic cooperation between Russia and China means for opportunities for growth in the relationship between Korea and Russia, whether China would be displacing or going after similar projects that might otherwise be fulfilled by Korean investors, or whether that growth in relationship and development of resources based on Chinese demand will also create similar incentives for Korea.
I'm Michael Trey Kim. I work on Central Asian issues. So I'm curious how Russia views South Korea's decades-old economic history in Central Asia. There's the former Daewoo, now GM auto plant in Uzbekistan, and textiles, and of course oil in Kazakhstan. Just this year, I believe, President Moon Jae-in announced $12 billion in deals in Uzbekistan. Yeah, so I'm wondering, does Russia sees that as competition or as complementary to its economy? Thank you.
Maybe we'll just pause right here, and we'll get to yours after we give Liudmila an opportunity. I know 4 questions is a lot to handle all at once, so we'll give you an opportunity to answer the first 2.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I don't think there's like a full-fledged competition between China and South Korea in the Russian forest. They have their niches. For example, China is investing either like these big projects that are government-led on the level of huge corporations, or they are small and medium-sized businesses are also investing in the Russian forest, like agriculture and this. And as Russia has a vast territory there, actually there's place for everybody. And Korean companies are also investing in agriculture, and they see more potential. Like this August, I was in Primorye region and had a meeting with the Korean Center for Korean. It's not in Vladivostok, but in Ussurisk, but it's a center for Korean investors in agriculture. And they told me about their current state and that they still have potential. They still have potential for, they see potential for South Korean companies investing in agriculture and with the aim of partly exporting part of their production back to South Korea, such as soybeans, for example. It's not big in scale right now, this cooperation, but it's growing, and also the level of small and medium-sized businesses. So I can't say that there is a visible competition, but China is naturally the biggest partner for Russia in Asia, but because the scale of economy, yes, it's just the scale of economy, the number of Chinese enterprises there, and it's mostly, sometimes it's even complementary because they develop different areas. For example, we have Chinese tourism and South Korean tourism to the forest, and they're different. Well, because Chinese tourism is mainly strictly controlled, organized by groups, and South Koreans are different, and actually there's place for everybody yet. And the demand, the growing demand for accommodation, for example, it produces workplaces for locals, and also the knowledge of languages, Chinese, Korean, is becoming in more and more demand there, as they need locals to show them the places. So it's also some sort of cooperation that is kind of complementary, maybe. And I think this is like, yeah. I hope I replied to your question from the best of my knowledge. And also the Russian view on South Korean cooperation with Central Asia. Yes, there's real serious, the growth of cooperation between Korea and Uzbekistan is really visible. And I know that there are some projects for further growth of this cooperation. Russia views. I haven't seen anything, any contradiction between Russia's cooperation with Central Asian states, traditional cooperation, yes, and South Korea cooperation. They are just developing different areas, yes, and the mining, there's plenty of mining sites in Russia, so there's no need to compete with Koreans for mining in Central.
That seems to be Jae-in's implication.
For example, yeah, there have been several routes of this, yes, Trans-Eurasian transport corridors, and Russia knows about it. Of course, we are offering our Trans-Siberian Railroad potential, yes. There are other different options going through other states. But Russia usually advertises the idea that you don't need to cross any borders with the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And it also has its limits, so we can't accommodate all the freight going between Asia and Europe. So I think that as the volume of freight is growing, everybody will find their place there. So and if South Korea's projects are helping Central Asian states to develop, that's good. So there's nothing, and it's in the Russian interest as well, as they are our neighbors, and it's in the Russian interest for the local people in the Central Asian state to have jobs there, yes, to be happy there, to buy Russian products, maybe the next stage. So it's all I think goes in the idea of just developing and growing local standard of living. Thank you.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. I heard from our North Korean expert, Dr. Mansurov, that in his opinion, the dynamic of a market economy has taken off in North Korea in a way that there's no going back. And of course, the government doesn't want it to go back anyway. but obviously it's not an evolved, mature country with a market economy. So here, the speakers we've had here have been debating what would be the model then if they did achieve this economic reunification of North and South Korea. What would be the best or the likely outcome of the model that would develop in the North? And one speaker here argued very strongly. He said, what we don't want is a chaebol model imported into the North and just reproduced there. But does Russia have any anticipations about this, or what would be the best outcome in terms of trade agreements with Russia for the North?
Gil Rosman, nice to see you again, Liudmila. And I edit the ASEAN Forum, and we just posted an article in the Country Report, Russia, summarizing some Russian articles on Korea, including articles by Eva Shentsev, the ambassador to South Korea and the ambassador to North Korea, and so on. Also, just posting this week an article on the Russia-China border by Gaia Christofferson, which is fascinating because it suggests some dramatic changes because of the power of Siberia. This just came online, this gas pipeline, and China is agreeing to more industrialization in the Russian Far East, although it's mostly in Amurska Oblast, not in Primorye. But I'm interested in a lot of issues you've raised, and some of them will probably be touched on by another article coming out later this month by Artyom Lukin on Russia-China relations. I mean, not Russia-China, Russia-Korea relations, and whether Russia's trying to take advantage of the South Korea-Japan deterioration in relations. But let me ask a few specific questions. Some Russian sources blame South Korea for doing too little and for holding back on what they're doing with North Korea and on not fulfilling the trilateral promise, and also for the THAAD deployment and now possibility of more missile defense deployments. So there's a kind of negative streak in Russian articles about South Korea that you don't really convey, that I think is, that's sort of mixed with this positive, hope for what's going to happen. But another issue is the tourism. There's articles I've seen that suggest that Chinese tourism has been essentially going to casinos in Vladivostok. Are South Koreans doing the same thing? Is that the kind of tourism Russia's getting? There doesn't seem to be that much to do in Vladivostok. I've been there a few times, but I don't know. Is it? Another issue is what's gone wrong with previous South Korean and other plans to invest in the Russian Far East. In South Korea, it all started, I think, with the Hyundai Hotel, which was sort of the first nice hotel in Vladivostok, and then it fell apart. The investment was sort of everything seems to be confiscated or extorted or corruption. So it seems to me a more detailed analysis of what goes wrong in the Russian Far East. And of course, the latest development plan for the Russian Far East quietly faded after failing badly in a year or two ago, and now there's a new plan, but is that also likely to fail badly, because not just because of the reasons you gave, but because of some internal ones? I guess I could go on and on here, but it just seems to me that there's so many issues you're raising, and it's so fascinating, and I'm eager to hear more, including about the relationship between the Korean community in Ustyurtsk and elsewhere, and the South Korean community. In the 1990s, there was sort of a battle between North Koreans and South Koreans going on in the Russian Far East. And there were 10 or 15,000 Korean Russians out there. Have they had any success in working together, or is that still a big problem, how to draw on this ethnic connection?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree that this issue, all the issues, are really too comprehensive, probably. Yes, if we speak about the whole bunch of problems, and not only problems but the developments in the Russia-South Korean relations. I will try to, as I'm not a specialist on all the issues, yes, that you raised, but I'll try to give my personal opinion from what I know. Speaking about the unification, possible Korean unification, Russia's position is that, I'll start with the official position. The Russian official position is that we welcome the Koreans-driven cooperation and unification, but with when interests of all the parties involved are taken into consideration and are satisfied. So it's from what I can expect here is that Russia welcomes inter-Korean integration, possible economic integration in whatever model. But what is totally unacceptable for Russia is the South Korean absorption of North Korea, obviously. That's a problem of how you see this situation. Right now, I agree with Dr. Mansurov that it's market economy in North Korea, and everybody knows it already. It's not a secret. But as Russian experts say, and everybody else, I think, that more reforms are needed for the North Korean economy to take off. Because the current model, it's half-half. It's state ownership, yes, public ownership on means of production, and market relations and on other spheres. So it can't long forever in this situation, and they obviously can't go back to the state distribution system, because the state can't just supply for everybody anymore. So there should be some reforms, or as they call it, state measures, yes, for accommodating this ongoing change. And what usually Russia welcomes is the growing cooperation with North Korea, actually, in economic sphere, to educate them more about how other countries develop. Okay, they don't like the Soviet model, Russian model. I can understand them. The Chinese model has its specific characteristics that cannot apply to North Korea. And right now, from my perspective, North Korea is growing their own chaebols. I call them North Korean style chaebols. They also have these big corporations from different spheres, connected closely to state or military, however, with diversified production in many spheres. And so it's very interesting, actually, if we closely look at the current economic development of North Korea, how they take some things from their neighbors, actually. But again, as they have their own specific features, they cannot just copy someone's experience, which is wise, yes. They're slowly moving in some direction, which the aim is just to improve people's living. That's what I see. And for Russia, it's very good. If people live well there, we don't have the problem of refugees, fantastic. No, we don't have it at all. I mean, in the future, yes, if something goes wrong. So it's Russia's priority, again, in the region are peace, first of all, yes, and development of forest regions to attract and retain population there. And Gil, you've covered so many questions. I'll do my best to summarize what I think on them. Of course, maybe some people from the Far East could accuse me of presenting a too rosy picture of Russia-South Korean cooperation. But I just didn't want to concentrate on gloomy picture, to be honest, because there's many critics. If you speak to people from the Far East, they criticize central government, they criticize their own authorities, they criticize other countries for not fulfilling their obligation, etc. You can criticize as much as possible, but it's, from my point of view, it's better to try to find niches or areas where cooperation can be beneficial to both countries, from my perspective. And of course, Russia expected more bold approach of President Moon to inter-Korean cooperation. And North Korea also expected more, to put it properly, they really tried to believe that President Moon can be different from all the previous presidents. But unfortunately, it didn't work out, unfortunately. And that's why inter-Korean cooperation stalled at this stage. That's why there were so many negotiations last year and almost nothing this year. Because North Koreans just realized that it's just not going to work out, except for this groundbreaking ceremony of the roads connection. They would have nothing. That's why they stopped just talking. They just realized that there's no practical measures taken, and they wanted Kumgansan to be opened. Now they'll probably demolish the buildings built by South Korean side, and I can't really say that they are fully unfair, as they have been sitting idle, all these buildings, and they can't actually develop the resort now, which they're trying to do, probably for Chinese tourists, maybe, we'll see. So Russia also expected that inter-Korean cooperation would move and that we can see more cooperation in trilateral project. It didn't work out, so we can say that the South Koreans are to blame, but we'll see if it works out in the future, maybe then. Tourism. As far as I know, tourism for South Korea is usually weekend tours, just 2 days. It's very popular, especially among young people. As locals say, you can just, in the central square in Vladivostok, you can see lots of young Korean ladies doing selfies, because it's a trend, it's trendy, it's popular in South Korea. The current South Korean society is like this. Something is being advertised, and everybody wants there. There's a joke about carrot cream in Russia, because there was somebody, some Korean who came back from Vladivostok and just showed on the internet some carrot cream that he brought from there, and then a real crowd of Korean tourists started demanding carrot cream in Vladivostok shops. So it's very interesting. So it's not about casinos, actually, in terms of Korean tourism. And right now they're developing a new mode as traveling traveling by Trans-Siberian Railroad. So maybe the next step will be of more South Koreans going to other cities along the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Yes, we have lots of previously failed projects of South Korean companies in the Russian Far East. Different obstacles, for example, I just mentioned the Hyundai, one of the latest examples. Hyundai built a factory near Vladivostok, investing more than $100 million. It was supposed to produce some electric equipment, but the plans for the distribution of this equipment in Russia were Russian currency devaluated, so they expected much more returns. But then, unfortunately, they just bad luck in this situation. Unfortunately, the ruble was devaluated. So and they couldn't just ensure the return of the investment, and the local authorities who were supposed to buy that equipment, they just couldn't guarantee the price in dollars that South Korean investors wanted. That's why the factory didn't work, and they just sold it to one of the Russian companies called Dobraflot. It's a pity, but for several years I was hearing about that factory as one of the worst examples of Russia-Korea cooperation before President Moon came to power. But after he came to power, South Koreans immediately forgot about that. So it just demonstrates how important political will is here. And I can see that right now the Korean government really it has been trying to improve the situation, created new borders, new consulting borders on site for Koreans in Vladivostok, for example, that support Korean Investor Support Center. But I can't say that it led to a huge impact right now. It takes time. You can't expect that any policy will give its results in like 1 or 2 years, especially in such difficult, in such non-trivial sector as investment, huge investment, or trade is already okay, investment mostly. So I think that it just takes time. First of all, mutual. As I mentioned, that some of the commonly cited reasons for as obstacles for growing cooperation is language barrier, lack of general information about Russia, and from my point of view, this, for example, tourism boom and the expansion of information about Russia in South Korea right now, what is happening right now, it may really yield its results, but in the future. So it's kind of providing a platform for mutual recognition, for better mutual understanding. So we'll see how it goes, but from that point of view, it's very interesting. And also, Russian plans for Far East development. People from the Far East, they always complain about the central government strategies and plans for the development of the region. Yes, it's usual, because they think that they see it better, and the central government always comes and say, okay, we'll do this, this, and that for you to be happy. And after 10 years, they ask, you are happy, aren't you? You aren't? Why not? So it looks like a usual model. And here is the issue of somehow harmonizing central government plans for this region and the local interests, local authorities, local businesses, local population interests. I don't have an answer how to do it best. Really, it's local of high politics and the local conditions, which should be different. But right now, I think the central government think that they do their best, and but the locals still have different expectations sometimes, and exactly in such an atmosphere, international and foreign investors have to work. So they have to understand the local conditions and somehow fit with the government plans for this region. It doesn't make things easier for foreign investors, but I think that's the situation how it is. For such a big country as Russia, it's difficult maybe to expect something different, but we'll see how it goes.
So we've unfortunately ran out of time, but the fact that there's just so much more to say and so much more to cover just means that maybe we'll have you back sooner than later. But before we go, I'd like to ask everyone in joining me in thanking our speaker today for her great comments and her great fielding of questions.